Good afternoon and welcome everybody to Beyond JMS. I'm Temple Northup, the director of the School of Journalism and Media Studies here at SDSU. For those joining us for the very first time, Beyond JMS events are platforms for professionals to share valuable tips and insights about careers in the media and skills you need to succeed. We hold them Fridays here on Zoom and we post them on YouTube afterwards, so you can catch it live or after the fact. I'm excited to have Alex joining us today to talk about podcasting. If you're like me, I love podcasts. I listen to one when I drive in every morning, often when I drive home. I was looking up some data and it seems that about 120 million people in the US are active podcast listeners, and that's just expected to grow in the coming years. So before I turn things over to Alex, I want to take a moment for a land acknowledgement. Land acknowledgement is a formal statement that recognizes and respects Indigenous peoples as traditional stewards of a given geographic area and the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous people and their ancestral territories. For San Diego State, we recognize the land as Kumeyaay. For millennia, the Kumeyaay people have been a part of this land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the San Diego State community, we acknowledge this legacy. We promote this balance and harmony. We find inspiration from this land, the land of the Kumeyaay. So back to Alex. Alex is a writer, a podcaster, and as she will tell you, an excessive tweeter. And I also said that she's particularly excited about today because it involves her two favorite things. Favorite thing number one, talking. Favorite thing number two, podcasting. And she's done a number of podcasts, which she will tell you about, all of them, including the ones that she started when she was here at SDSU as a student. She also loves talking about her experiences at E-News. I know that she shared with me that a lot of her presentations, students like to ask her about her experience there. So after her presentation, feel free, Alex is an open book, so we can talk about anything we want. But for now, let me turn it over to you to talk about what the main focus of today is, which is podcasting. So take it away.
Awesome. I'm so excited to be here with you all. So thank you for introducing yourselves in the chat. I'm going to want to ask you all more questions. So feel free to drop questions at any point. We can answer them along the way and feel free to interact. But here we go. So I guess I'll introduce kind of the different podcasts I have had throughout my life, I guess, but mostly the past like 6-ish years, I want to say. So I've just always loved talking. Probably you can tell by now, but I really enjoy kind of talking and I've always loved radio. And then as soon as I discovered podcasts, love podcasts because it's more niche to kind of interest. So I remember kind of for those SDSU students here, when I started as an incoming freshman, I was so excited to get involved with KCR College Radio. Like that was like the summer before starting. I was like, okay, let's look in what clubs I'm going to join. And that was kind of the one I had my eyes on. And then when in 2016, so it was my beginning of my junior year, I started a podcast with two friends and it was called Swiped Right, which was about dating and about dating apps. And what we would do is we would be on our phones at SDSU, have like the radius set to less than a mile or 2 miles away. We would just swipe right on everyone and then invite those people to be guests on our show. We ended up stopping it just because time commitment. It was our junior year of college. It was a lot. But I still wanted to do podcasts. So I started another one as I was a student. And that one was called I Have a Lot of Questions, because as much as I love talking, I also love asking people questions and kind of finding out information from people about whatever it is that they're passionate about or excited about. But that one I found was not getting much listeners outside of my own core circle, which is why I wanted to start another podcast once I graduated to kind of be more niche and get more of a following. So I was living in LA after graduating. As Temple said, I was working at E-News and I wanted to do something that was like a passion project outside of work, especially because I was feeling so homesick. So I started my podcast, which, not to be biased, but probably my favorite one of the 4 I have done, but that one was called Dating, or is called Dating or At Least Trying. And so that one was about dating or at least trying, because I was dating in LA and kind of having fun with that experience. And then me and an also SDSU alum, JMS alum, Emily Navarro. We started a podcast last year. I want to say last August we started it. And we cover just news, pop culture, politics, whatever was going on in current events, and stuff we cared about. And so we started that podcast. We did proposition kind of like information like on Instagram, and then also an information podcast on kind of the 12 California propositions that we were voting on, because we felt like we wanted to make information easily accessible for people. So we had done that one, and we kind of took a pause on it just because I knew I was moving, had family stuff going on, and then she started a new job. So she's at Access Hollywood. So if you're interested in working in entertainment, definitely hit up Emily Navarro. Love her. Anyways, so let's get into you starting your own podcast and kind of getting into the process of what it takes to create your own podcast. So first we'll get into kind of creating that initial idea and wanting to actually launch a podcast. So I'm going to use dating, or at least trying, as my example for this. So first of all, what I like to say is if you want to be a podcaster, you have to be someone who consumes podcasts. They always say that about if you want to be a writer, you have to be a reader. And I feel like it's the same for podcasts as well. So I want you all to drop in the chat, what is your favorite podcast? There's no wrong answers here. What is the podcast that you like to tune into the most, you enjoy the most? Drop it in the chat. I'll tell you mine. Mine has always been Rob Has a Podcast was kind of the first one that I started listening to. And what that one is this guy, Rob Sesternino, was on the show Survivor. I love reality TV. Y'all will come to find that out if you follow me, or probably if I talk long enough. But I love reality TV, and he was on Survivor, and he talks about Survivor and Big Brother and other reality competition shows and kind of the strategy that goes behind those. So I probably listen to the nerdiest podcast. So like any of your answers, I want to hear them. But then I also loved Why Won't You Date Me by Nicole Byer. And she's a comedian and talks about her dating life and kind of dating adventures and has guests on. And then I have been listening for nostalgic reasons, but I used to love Ashley I from The Bachelor. She had a pod, she still has it, but I like the older episodes just because she would talk about her dating life. And yeah, so I see Kayla Jimenez just said Scrubbing In with Becca and Tanya Rad. I love that one as well. And so awesome. I'm seeing all your podcasts. I love it. But I loved ones where people just kind of talked and it felt like you were part of the room and they were just having conversations and with each other, but it didn't feel like an interview. It felt more like a conversation with a friend. So now that we know what podcasts we like and the ones that I like, since I overshared, now we want to talk about kind of getting into the next steps once you've identified what you like about what podcasts do you like. So creative questions you can ask yourself. So you have these podcasts that you like. What is it about the podcast that you admire? Kind of as I just shared about the ones that I had named, what I liked about them is just that they would have guests on. So you would hear from new perspectives, but it was still kind of like the same people. You're hanging out with the same guests the whole time. And you're kind of, it's not just an interview. It feels more like a conversation, like this organic thing kind of happening. And then the next question you can ask yourself is, what topic or niche are you passionate about? And I feel like that's really important because, I mean, obviously someone like, I see someone named Joe Rogan on here, someone like Joe Rogan, someone like, I'm trying to think, even people from The Bachelor, like Caitlin Bristow, maybe, like different people who are already public figures can have podcasts that are just named after them and not really have this niche topic. But that's because they already have this kind of audience behind them. But I think it's so important for podcasting to kind of have a niche that you're interested in, because that's how people are going to find you and are going to want to listen. I'm proud because Dating or At Least Trying, we've had over 21,000 downloads to date. And that's because it's about dating. And if someone's searching dating, they're going to see Dating or At Least Trying. Sorry, I see someone said there's so many Bachelor Nation podcasts I can't keep track of. I agree. Like the Help I Suck at Dating, the Bachelor, there's so many. But yeah, so figure out kind of what topic or niche you're passionate about. And honestly, I don't think you can be too niche. Like if you're interested in trying to think of a niche, like framework or interior design. I don't think that's that niche, but if you're interested in something super niche, do it. Because if you're interested in it, there's other people that are going to be interested in as well. And if there's not one out there that you like so far, be the person to create it, because there's an audience for every niche that you can possibly think of. So next you want to ask yourself, what style of podcast do you want to have? So there's the interview style podcast. There's narrative ones like Serial or like Dirty John. I love Dirty John. That one was so good. So kind of figure out what style podcast you're interested in. And they're going to kind of take different like things as well, different aspects. Yeah, Dirty John was so good. If you haven't listened to that, highly recommend it, everyone. Okay, but it is scary. We'll say that. So what are you going to name your podcast is the next question to ask yourself. And something I really, really, really recommend is doing something that's SEO friendly and that people are going to find you, especially based on the niche. So for dating, or at least trying, people are going to search dating and they're going to find it. And what's great about like my different episodes too, my episode that was called How to Flirt is like by far the most downloaded episode, because people were probably searching how to flirt, how do I flirt? And that's what's going to pop up, which is great. Okay, so I'm more of a creative person, but I know we have to get into technical stuff as well and what it takes to create your podcast. So first of all, you're going to ask yourself, how often am I going to release episodes? So as someone who has taken a pause on their podcast, I sound like a hypocrite, but you definitely should try to do weekly or at least some sort of consistent schedule. Of course, you can take breaks for holidays or mental health reasons. Mental health is most important, just saying, but definitely kind of come up with a consistent schedule. So weekly is the recommended one, probably dependent on your content. If you're more of a newsy one, you could have multiple times a week if you have the capacity for that, but weekly is recommended. And then you want to ask yourself, are you going to have guests? And this is something to figure out, because then there's that extra step of when you're planning the podcast, like who am I going to reach out to? How am I going to reach them? How am I going to work with their schedules into mine? So that's something you'll want to plan out as well. Next, you want to ask yourself, how long will my episodes be? So this totally depends on your style of podcast. If you have a news one, if you have a narrative type podcast, this could totally differ. I'm definitely kind of the interview style podcast is the ones I have done. So for my type of podcast, that 30 to 45 minutes is recommended, but something that I think you should all ask yourselves this whole time through the planning process, through the creation process, is what do you like consuming as a podcast listener? For example, I love a long podcast. I really do. Like Rob has a podcast. They'll talk about Survivor for like 3 hours, which I know is excessive. So I'm not afraid of going above that 1 hour mark, because I'm like, I know I love it, especially when it's an interesting conversation and you don't want it to end. Like you are fine with that kind of or at least I am as a consumer. So it's totally dependent on what you enjoy as a podcast and what you think will work. Trust your gut on that. And another point I want to say is consistency is key. So if you decide to have this style of podcast, stick with that, so the people listening know what to expect from each episode. And then next, you want to ask yourself, how am I going to publish my podcast? So I'll get into this next a little bit deeper, but I use a platform called Podbean. I pay about $120 a month for that. And the reason I'm doing a paid one personally is because a free one was not available at the time I started podcasts. But now Spotify has a free platform called anchor.fm. And I'll get into that in a little bit, but that's a good note. Next, you want to ask yourself, am I going to have theme music? Am I going to have podcast art? Which you probably will want. So kind of figuring out those details of, are you going to use royalty-free music, which you can get from Purple. I believe it's Purple. I should have written this down. I think it's purple-planet.com, and you can get royalty-free music on there that you're able to use. But otherwise, if you have friends who are also creatives like yourself, because you'd want to make a podcast, you can see if someone can make you theme music and pay them, of course, or podcast art as well. And then you want to ask yourself, oh, awesome. Thank you. The link is in the chat for purpleplanet.com, and that's the royalty-free music. And then next, you'll want to ask yourself, how am I going to record? And how am I going to edit? So let's get into that a little deeper. So for recording, let's go into that first. So I'm going to show you, I'm like always paranoid about sharing my screen just because I feel like I'm gonna be talking about it and not know what's up there. Okay, so Audacity is what I use to record, which honestly, it's not my favorite, I will admit, but it's a free platform. And so I highly recommend it just because it is free and it's one of those things you can use and download and whatever, but definitely explore what's best for you. Then I want to show you, and I can show you the mic on the, I don't know if you can see me as well as the screen right now. I have this Yeti mic. Also, I have two screens right now, so I'm like, I don't know where I'm looking, but I have this blue Yeti mic and it's right there on the screen as well. This one is a USB mic, so it plugs into your computer, unless you have one of those new Macs, which don't have the USB, but that's a whole other thing I could go on about. But the blue Yeti mic is right here and it has a USB. So that's a really simple way. And it does have good quality to have a good quality mic and hear your voice really well. Another thing I use is called Zencastr. So at the beginning of the pandemic, because of course, a lot of times when you have guests now, it's going to be virtual because, I mean, unless you have a consistent co-host that you're able to see at this time. But what I love about Zencastr is you can connect with people virtually. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I had been using Zoom to record podcasts. But the thing about Zoom that really sucks is it messes up your audio quality. And what I love about Zencastr is that it records you and your guests. You can also do video, but it records you and your guest on separate streams. So when you go into that editing process, you have two different audio streams going on. So you're able to say someone's, I don't know, computer started freezing, like you're able to easily edit that out, even if the other person was talking during it. Whereas, you know, sometimes there's that weird feedback on Zoom. If someone says, or coughs or takes a drink of water, because that's something I would get frustrated when my guests would like drink water during the podcast, because on Zoom, you can hear everything, but on Zencastr, that's a great thing. If they're drinking water while you're talking, you can easily mute their mic at that time. So Zencastr is awesome. And I believe you're able to do it for free at the time being for, during the pandemic, they have it for free. So that's a really awesome tool as well. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for now. Okay, cool. I'm glad that worked out because usually I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to sharing my screen. But I'll show you that mic one more time. And I just moved from San Diego to Boston 2 months ago. So it's a little, but this is the mic. And then I bought this from Amazon, a little cover for it. So it kind of makes that better sound quality. But this is the mic for the basics. But if you don't want to get a mic, another good resource that I would use in the beginning was just my kind of Apple headphones that came with the phone, because those actually are really good. And Rob Sesternino, the one who does the Survivor podcast, he uses that sometimes when guests don't have a microphone. And honestly, it sounds pretty good. So there's some options for you there. Okay, so now let's talk about promoting your podcast once you have it going. So this totally depends on the type of podcast that you have. So, one thing I forgot to mention for anchor.fm, which is the Spotify one, I think I showed it on the screen, but it's called anchor.fm. So what this podcast platform does is that you can set up your podcast on anchor.fm. It's free to use. And by setting it up on there, it's very simple to get it on Spotify, to get it on Apple, to get it Apple Podcasts, to get it on, there's a few other ones that I can't think of at the top of my head, but it gets it on all these different platforms. Temple just dropped the link in the chat. So you're able to use that free resource, which is so awesome that Spotify makes it accessible for people to post podcasts. And you'll definitely want to get it on the platform so then people can find you, listen to you easily and all that stuff. So how did I promote the podcast once I had it going, and how does one go about that? So again, I think it's dependent on your type of podcast. For mine, I wanted to have a social media presence with it. I wanted to have business cards. I wanted to have merch of some sort. So I had stickers, and I did postcards at one point for dating, or at least trying as well. And then if you have guests on, you can have them promote their episodes, and that reaches their network. But something I really want to mention is SEO really is key. As I said, for my past kind of episodes for Dating or At Least Trying. The ones that did really well were those how to flirt episodes. I did one that was, I talked to a woman, I'm friends with her, she went to SDSU as well, but she sells feet pics. And so the episode was titled How to Sell Feet Pics. And people are searching that kind of stuff, especially during the pandemic, because I wrote an article about this, but feet pic selling and buying increased during the pandemic. So you can just search, topics that people are going to search about, you can make your podcast titled, and then people are going to find you organically as well. As far as social media, what I like about it, I love Instagram. Well, I don't, but I love using it for podcast promotion, because I feel like Instagram, if you have like content that's easily shareable, people are going to share it on their stories, and then new people are going to find it that way. So for What a Week, which is my news podcast that I have with Emily Navarro, when we did the prop information, we literally did like an infographic for each of the 12 props, and we explained them like in easily accessible ways, and people shared those, and it was awesome. And for another thing, we would just do different info card graphics for different like topics we talked about. So it was like the day of the Super Bowl, we shared, because this was also when the Free Britney documentary came out, I think New York Times did it on Hulu. And so kind of people were actively talking about Free Britney and kind of represent how women and young women are represented in media, and especially in the 2000s, like early 2000s. And so we shared an infographic that talked about, it was like, let's talk about Justin Timberlake. And we talked about the 2004 Super Bowl and how he had pulled the part of Janet Jackson's like bodice off and exposed her, and how her career was essentially ruined after that, but his only grew after that, which I mean is a issue and something that we still see how women are represented in the media, but especially at that time. And so we talked about that instance, and we talked about kind of the Free Britney movement, and what Justin Timberlake what he did. Anyway, go look at it on What a Week show on Instagram. But so we shared that, and it ended up getting like 700 likes. It got like 1,000 or something shares. It was awesome, or 1,000 plus people seeing it, and it was awesome. And it was good to get that information out there first, but second, good to get eyes on it as well. So I definitely look into what can be shareable for what content you're speaking on. So I definitely recommend social media. Business cards, I wanted to do it just because like I wanted to be a professional for Dating or At Least Trying. So I had business cards, but I would put them in coffee shops on I don't go to coffee shops anymore because of the pandemic, but I used to like put them on the little cork boards, and I don't know how much traction it got from there, but it's a fun way to kind of get your name out there. Same with merch. We had stickers, and it's fun to see, like I have a What a Week sticker on my Hydro Flask right now. It's fun. It's just fun. Even if it's just your friends, it's fun to see your sticker places, and people are going to ask them about the sticker that they have on their Hydro Flask, their laptop, whatever it is. So definitely kind of figure out what works best for you and what you can maintain as well. Okay, so now I want to get into overall just tips and ideas for anyone looking to start their own podcast. First and foremost, I said it once, I'm going to say it again, listen to other podcasts. The best way to find inspiration is to find it through others, because if it works for someone and people are listening to that and you're listening to that, it can work for you as well. For Dating or At Least Trying, for What a Week with Emily, I love the podcast called It's Been a Minute. I forgot the name for a second. It's Been a Minute from NPR with Sam Sanders. And he at the end does like the good news of the week, and people will share good things that happened to them that week. So we kind of wanted to do that because like the news can be a little depressing sometimes. So we wanted to add something in and kind of add like good things that happen to the people around us. So we kind of stole that idea, but it's repurposing, but definitely we didn't name it the same thing, I swear, but definitely having different things that you find inspiration from others, because if it works, it can work for you as well. Another tip is to critique yourself. your first episode is going to be awful. Like it just is. It's not going to be good. And for me, it took having 2 podcasts before I had the dating or at least trying one that turned out to be great. So it's you just have to learn from your mistakes and learn from the episodes you put out there. So listen back, critique yourself, do all that. But speaking of that, don't be too hard on yourself either. It's constantly a learning and growing process. It's only going to get better and better. So don't be too hard on yourself. Don't like not post something just because you're like, oh my God, this is awful. Like, who cares? Just do it. Like, just put it out there, put yourself out there. And I think success can come from that. Then next, see what resonates with your audience. See what episodes people say they absolutely loved and see what kind of people are listening to. Since we had that How to Flirt episode on dating or at least trying, that did like so much better than I thought it would. I was like, okay, SEO really is key. Let me start like making these titles being something that people will search. So see what resonates with your audience, with your listeners, and go from there. And then the next tip I wanted to say is be niche. I said it already, but be as niche as you want to be and as you can be, and talk about those topics that you feel passionate about, because that's what's going to resonate with others if it resonates with yourself. And then I also added this last one, which is kind of what I just said, but enjoy what you're podcasting about, because I mean, this is going to be a side project, a side passion, and do something that you enjoy doing, because life's too short. We don't need to be doing things we don't want to do if we don't have to. So do something that you genuinely enjoy talking about, that you want to upkeep and continue doing. So make sure it's something that you enjoy and that you enjoy doing. I see there's a question in the audience, in the chat. I sound so, I don't know. I was like in the audience, like I'm like Ariana Grande. Anyway, so this question from Bailey says, a lot of podcasters will get backlash for the way they refer to people, places, things, or unintentionally spreading false information. Do you find yourself getting nervous about approaching sensitive topics, even though you have a media studies background? How do you reconcile with those potential feelings? That's a really good question. I'm trying to think how to go about it. So when we created What a Week, since that one is about news and politics and pop culture, the reason we wanted to do that is because we felt like there was so much false information kind of going on, and we wanted to use having our journalism degree to kind of our benefit, I guess. And that's why, like, especially with the props, why we really wanted to do that, because we know, oh, thank you for dropping that How to Flirt link. Yes, everyone should listen to that. It's a good episode. Sorry, I get easily distracted. But I think I do get nervous covering topics, but that's why you just got to make sure what you're talking about, you feel good about talking about. If you don't feel comfortable talking about a topic, I don't think you should. I think you should talk about things that you feel comfortable and that you feel like you have a grasp on. So like for the prop infographics, as well as the episode we did, I spent hours doing research, because I can admit I would not understand like props whatsoever in the past, because I didn't take as much time as I maybe should have. So we spent hours figuring it out. And then me and Emily came together and we reviewed each prop together and said what information we found out from researching it to make sure we were both aligned as well. So I would just say, use your media studies background to your advantage, and you're like, trust yourself too. You're media literate and you're able to find the right information. So definitely you can do it. Use it to your advantage. Sydney said, so curious. Oh, and also I'm done with like the information spewing. So like, feel free to drop your questions at this point as well. And I'm willing to answer anything about podcasting. I graduated in 2018. So anything about life as a recent grad. Am I still, I wonder how long I'm able to call myself a recent grad. Anyway, so feel free to drop questions. So Sydney said, so curious, how do you come up with the name for a podcast? Half the time when I have an idea name, I Google it and that name is already associated with a podcast. Sorry, I'm not laughing at your question. Dr. Sweetser said I'm not so recent. I think I'm recent. Anyway, want to know your thoughts for podcast name generating. That's a great question because yeah, it's hard to come up with names. It's one of those things that it could take a while. I think you just have to kind of explore, because when I was naming dating, or at least trying, I was like, should I call it like dating in LA? Should I call it like, it took me a while to come up with it. I think brainstorm with yourself, brainstorm with some close friends. But it is difficult, and yeah, there are oftentimes names already associated. I don't know. I wish I had a better answer, but I feel like just kind of brainstorming with yourself and with friends and taking the time you need to figure out that name.
I have a question for you. So you mentioned like the importance of having like a consistent publishing schedule, ideally once a week if you could swing it. Can you talk a little bit about just the amount of time it took for you to do like one episode, of a podcast, in terms of planning it out, figuring out what you're going to say? There's the actual recording and then the editing, the post-production. Like how much time on average were you spending on any of your podcasts?
Totally. So the beginning of my answer might be a little annoying. My brain works very weird. Like I come up with random ideas all the time. So if you're more structured and I'm not like me, you might spend more time kind of planning out episodes as you go. But for example, for dating, or at least trying, what I would do is like, if I had an idea, I'd just type it in my phone and then that would turn into an episode. So I can't speak as much to kind of the planning for that podcast. For What a Week, Emily, my co-host, and I would kind of see what was in the news, text each other what we each wanted to cover that week. And then I would spend, I don't know, like an hour or two, depending what we were talking about, doing the research, sometimes more like for the prop episode and stuff, but spend an hour or two kind of planning how we were going to talk about what we we're going to talk about and making sure we had good information. Then from there, the podcast editing, however long it takes you to edit or to record the podcast, however long it takes you. Coordinating guests when I had dating, or at least trying, would take a little bit depending on the guests and kind of accommodating to their schedule as well. But yeah, the recording podcast takes like maybe 20 minutes plus however long it takes to record. Then editing, Emily would do the editing for What a Week since we were on video as well. So I know that took her a long time. I'm not a video editor whatsoever, but when I would edit dating, or at least trying, I would say it would take the length of the episode plus another maybe like 30 minutes. So that's how long it would take to edit. You want to make sure you're listening to the whole thing and kind of like going through as you go. And then sharing it, probably posting it on Podbean / if you use anchor.fm, I would say that took maybe like another 30 minutes and kind of writing up the description, writing up the title. But a good thing about anchor.fm and any other podcast publishing platforms is that once you have them synced to go on Apple and go on all the other platforms, it does it automatically. So you only have to do that process once. So you're just sharing it on anchor.fm and then it'll go to the other platforms. And then again, I'm unstructured. So then I would just like, when I was scrolling through Twitter, I would see a tweet that I wanted to share on dating, or at least trying, and the description would be like, oh, a new episode out now. So that's totally dependent on your podcast too. But I would say definitely a few hours a week commitment if you're doing a weekly podcast.
Thank you. And we just got a question over in the Q&A, and I'll go and read it. Did you just continue podcasting after you graduated, or did you get another job as well? If you did go into another job, what was it and how did you get into it?
Yes. So I wish I could podcast full time. Unfortunately, I cannot right now. So it was in addition to a job. So after graduating SDSU, let me just say, if you're in college right now, don't put so much pressure on yourself, because I did. And the job I ended up getting, it would have happened even if I didn't stress out all the time. Dr. Sweetser can probably speak to it. If y'all know Dr. Nate, he definitely can speak to it. I would like cry in class. I'd be so stressed. But I got a job at E-News after graduating, which I'm very fortunate to have gotten, which I had reached out. Pro tip: if you want a job, reach out on LinkedIn. I had reached out to my manager on LinkedIn the year before just to pick her brain. And then she ended up being like, hey, you should apply for this. So I got a job at E-News on their social team. And so that's what I was doing for a year and a few months after I graduated. And then I decided, you know what, I don't think entertainment's really for me. I had moved back to San Diego and I was thinking I wanted to be a marriage and family therapist. So I was going to go to grad school for that. But then I kind of was like, because I'm someone who likes to have everything planned. Like I'm very just like, okay, let's plan my whole life out right now. And I know I need to calm down. So I was like, you know what, grad school's always there. Let's calm down. And I was working a few different part-time jobs. Then the pandemic happened, got furloughed from those jobs, got a social media job in September after being unemployed for 6 months. And then now I'm working at an agency, marketing agency called Media Cause, and our clients are all nonprofits and social good clients. So I'm doing that now back in marketing. But yeah, it's definitely a process of figuring out what you want to do and figuring out the importance what's important to you in a job. I feel like I'm going answering this way too much, but figuring out kind of what's important to you. It's a process, as Bailey said, and not putting so much pressure on yourself, I think too.
You'll see there's another question, which was, were your podcasts scripted? Do you prep talking points before you record each episode so you make sure to hit all the points you want to make, or could you go more into the process of that prepping before you actually hit record?
Definitely. So I really hope, who asked this, Sydney, I really hope you like this answer, but I'm very unstructured. But so I'll give 2 examples. For What a Week, since we were talking about news, I wanted to make sure I was hitting the important stuff. At first, we did write out kind of a script for introducing the news, and then we would go into conversation after that, and that part wouldn't be scripted. But then we felt like we were reading too much, and that you want a podcast to sound more conversational. So Emily and I just would do the important talking points and then have a conversation about it after that. For dating, or at least trying, sometimes I would write down questions, but most of the time I would not. I would kind of just know what we wanted to talk about. Because I just really try not to have a ton of things listed down, because I fear that would make the conversation not go organically, because if you have a list of questions and you're like, I have to follow this, you might miss out on a follow-up question because you're like, wait, I need to ask this one next, but then you could have had a follow-up question had you not. So I would say it depends on who you are and how much structure you like, but I would recommend having as least structure, or least plan, but have as least written down to say as possible. Is that it? I feel like that was a bad answer. I hope that was a good answer.
Oh, that's good. And Gail commented, it just went away from me. She just mentioned that, she has a podcast and they prefer a full docket, but it's a sports one. So it's all about they need to have, right, that specific information.
Oh, yes. Awesome. Yeah, I see that. Gail said it's important to have our facts at hand or the fans get irritated. Very true. You definitely want to have your facts right. I agree with that. I'm in a fantasy league. I don't know sports, but I'm in it for the competition, and I could see how people would be mad if the facts weren't right. So totally understand.
Got another question just asking about your experience. What was your experience like with E-News?
Yeah. So I was on the social team at E-News, and for most companies, especially ones that take social media seriously, I think most companies should have a whole team. So at E-News, there was a team of 6 of us, I believe, at the time that I was there. And I love Twitter. That's probably my favorite platform of all the platforms. And so I was kind of the Twitter lead, and I was kind of the one setting the strategy for Twitter and doing all that fun stuff, live tweeting The Bachelor for our Bachelor fans here. And I'm very thankful for the experience, and I'm willing to answer any questions anyone has about or about working in entertainment in general. And there's such an importance of entertainment in our society, But for me, I felt like I wasn't doing enough, if that makes sense, or wasn't kind of making the difference. And I don't want to discount anyone working in entertainment. That's amazing if that's what you're passionate about. But I realize that's kind of not exactly what I'm passionate about. And I really enjoy my job now, for example, because I'm helping nonprofits and helping social good clients. And I feel like I'm making more of a difference. But there's many differences to be made, and we can all do it in different ways. But yeah, I at E definitely had a lot of opportunity to, I mean, at the time we had like 15 million Instagram followers, like 10 million Twitter followers. So it's a lot. And it was interesting. It was fun at the time.
We got a couple questions. I'll start with the first one. How comfortable are you with being vulnerable and personal on your podcast, and how do you prepare for that?
Yes, I'm very comfortable being vulnerable and personal, especially about my dating life. I feel like dating, like maybe I wouldn't be as vulnerable about other topics per se, but dating, I feel like it's fun to kind of share dating stories. How I prepared for that, I guess being open with friends, talking about dating, and then that translated to the podcast, because I was like, you know what, this information, this is me, this information can live out there. Like, I'm totally cool with that. And I think just listening to other podcasts where people were vulnerable, I absolutely love Nicole Byer's podcast. And she talks about, honestly, even Ashley Iconetti from The Bachelor, her early podcast too, they both talk about how they've never had boyfriends at the time. And just talking, Ashley talked about being a virgin because she was a virgin on The Bachelor and was open about it there. So I think just listening to other examples of people kind of being vulnerable was really cool to me. And I enjoyed that they did it, so I wanted to do it as well.
Awesome. And I think in some ways connected in terms of that vulnerability is the next question is, Alex, when recording episodes, how would you go about making them as authentic as possible, but always being mindful of getting explicit or things like that? Because I feel like certain people can get away with it, but I wonder how much that helps or hurt when trying to build up a show.
Right.
I hope that makes sense.
Totally. No, that I think that does make sense. That's a good question. I think maybe have your guidelines for what you don't feel comfortable sharing. And I would always ask before talking to a guest, like, what can I not ask you about? What's off limits? Like, let's set that up here. Because a lot of people do not want to talk about their sex lives. And that's totally fair. So I would make sure not to include that and talk and ask them about that. But I think kind of establishing your own boundaries is first when you're starting the podcast, and then establish that with each guest. And I feel like from there, it's kind of just a rhythm of what you feel comfortable with and kind of just figuring it out as you go, but definitely set those baselines. I hope that answered the question.
Another interesting question is, are your dates as comfortable with you talking about it?
Ooh,
which I guess is a way of like, you know, how open are you? I mean, I assume you're not just dropping names unless they were aware of it, but that's a good question of, you know, how much do you disclose? Like, do they know? Or, you know, have you ever heard from them saying, oh, I heard you're talking about me on your podcast?
Right. That is a great question. So I guess I'll start from now and then go back. But right now I am with my boyfriend. We've been together now 2 years, and like literally he's the love of my life. He's awesome. And the reason that we ended up together, I think partially the reason is that our second date was on the podcast. Like we recorded together after our first date. And I was like, please, like rank me, like give me a grade. Like, how was it? And so we kind of recapped the date. So I had always like asked after maybe someone ghosted me or like we didn't talk anymore. I was like, do you want to be on the podcast? Only one agreed in the whole time, someone who ghosted me. My second episode, people love that one if you want to go listen. But I talked to someone who had ghosted me. The other people would not be comfortable being on the podcast. As far as sharing, I would not ask them because if I could talk about them, because it's my experience, you know, and I wouldn't do anything identifying. It was usually from apps. So it wasn't like people could connect the dots of like mutual friends or stuff like that, because it was usually people I met that like no one would know anyway. And yeah, just making sure not to do anything identifying. Like I wouldn't talk about like their name, their social security. No, I'm just kidding. But I wouldn't talk about like where they worked or anything like that. So I would usually keep it pretty anonymous. And if they listened, sometimes they did.
Bailey has a question for you too. You mentioned starting a new job in a new city and that you took a pause on the podcasting. What's next for you? Do you plan on focusing just on the new job or plans on podcasting and ramping that up again?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't want to get like sad. I have a lot of family stuff going on right now. So it's just like hard to figure out the balance of like, I don't know. I could go again, I could rant all day because I'm just trying to understand how I feel about like how much time we spend doing things that feel the need to be productive. Like I absolutely love podcasting. In my current job, I'm starting to be able to help with the podcast that we have in our within our company. And so it's kind of just a process. Like it's hard to be like, oh, I want to do more work on the side of, you know what I mean? When you're working full time, have stuff going on. But I love podcasting. It's always going to be my passion. And I'm sure there will be more to come. I can't say when, because I don't know, but I love podcasting is truly something I'm very, very passionate about. So I hope to continue more.
Has there been, I mean, we've mentioned a few of the different episodes. If there's one episode that you had the most fun recording, I mean, there's some, you know, I'm looking at some of the titles just from Dating or at least Trying, like a very drunk episode, a very, you know, so just curious, is there one episode that sticks out that was like, this is your most favorite that you recorded?
Oh, that's
which may or may not be the best one, but your favorite that you actually recorded.
Oh, that's such a good question. Okay, I'm gonna be so annoying, and I might have a few. Let's see. Okay, I love the ghosting one. I think that's my second episode. I think it's called, I don't remember what it's called. I can try to find that in a minute, but it's the second episode and it's like interview with a ghost or interview with someone who ghosted me, something like that. I love
put
that.
It in the chat. It's in the chat.
Oh, awesome. Oh, yay. Awesome. Okay. I highly recommend that one for anyone who wants to listen. It's so like, I haven't re-listened in a while. It's probably really like awkward and uncomfortable, but I have that one. I mean, I can't tell if it's just for sentimental reasons, but a lot of people liked this one as well. But I love the one with my boyfriend, our second date one, because it's just fun. Because you can tell, like, I remember Dr. Nate, for those who know Dr. Nate at the time, was like, I could tell you liked him, like you were so giggly. I was like, yeah, I guess I was. So I love that one as well. And honestly, like maybe this is because this was the most recent one, but I did one with my good friend Jake Henry, who works in politics, and we did one called Dating Someone with Different Political Views. And Jake and I just laugh and laugh together. So I love that episode as well. So I don't know, there's a lot of good ones. And then there's one that was also fairly recent called Audio Blind Date. And I had two people like go on a blind date on the episode. So I love that one as well. But oh gosh, I love them all. This makes me want to like start recording more episodes anyway.
Well, I mean, so everyone should go check out Dating or at least Trying. Just for the episode titles. I mean, I'm just going through Grindr hookups and being into Republicans. That's an episode title.
That's a good one.
If that doesn't hook you in and make you want to know what is going on in that episode.
And that one's with a fellow SDSU JMS alum. So if anyone else wants to listen to those, that's a good one too.
So a couple other questions before we run out of time here. Did you do any internships while you're at SDSU? And if so, what were they?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I had worked at KPBS I could talk so much like beautiful things about KPBS because I thought it was that experience was so awesome. I started there August of my sophomore year. So beginning of sophomore year through when I graduated. That was an incredible experience. So I worked there for 3 years and I just kind of got to learn social media and learn it at a company, which was awesome. So if you're able to work at KPBS, highly recommend it. And then I had an internship at, I believe it's still called this, it might be called something else, but Power Digital Marketing, a PR internship with them the summer before senior year. That one, like, I don't think I needed as much because I didn't use it on applications as much or on my resume as much. But yeah, definitely I had those were like my two things I had. I remember like the summer before senior year, I was putting a lot of pressure on myself to like get an internship in entertainment and in LA because that's what I wanted to do. And I didn't get one, and I still got a job in entertainment. So I think kind of using the resources that are local to you are just as great.
And here's another really good question. Any advice on how you break out to start reaching people to be guests on the show once you've exhausted like your immediate network and your friends?
Definitely. I think I mean, it depends on the guest, what avenue you do to reach out to them. You could reach out on LinkedIn, you could reach out on Twitter. I love Twitter. I've said this already, but I think Twitter is a great networking tool. So I think you can use Twitter. You can reach out on whatever avenue if they have an email. But I think as long as you show you have kind of a consistent like podcast already, I think reach for the stars, like reach out for those big guests. I mean, maybe not someone like, I don't know why Obama came to my head, but maybe not like a big celebrity or politician or something. But yeah, if you start reaching out to different guests, I think that's a great idea. Not everyone's going to say yes. Most people may ignore you, especially if they're kind of a little more busy as individuals. But yeah, definitely just reaching out on like Twitter and establishing that you have that podcast presence already.
And so we're almost out of time. So what is like the biggest tip you wish you knew when you were first starting about like how to just create something successful?
Yeah. That's a great question. The biggest tip. Just enjoy what you're doing. Like have fun with it. It shouldn't feel like I mean, if you want this to be like a full-time thing, of course, that's a different story, but it really shouldn't feel like extra work you're putting on yourself. And I think the avenue to do that is cover a topic that's enjoyable to you, have fun with it, forgive yourself. But yeah, I think I just gave like 5 different tips, but just do something that you enjoy doing. And I think it'll be a lot easier.
Awesome. And since we started off with Halloween movies, do you have plans for Halloween night?
So my sister's birthday is on the 31st on literally Halloween day. And tomorrow, so my mom and sister live in Rhode Island and then I'm in Massachusetts, which for those who don't know, because I didn't realize how close they are, they're literally like Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts, like should just be one state. I don't get why they're 3 different states. Anyway, so for her birthday tomorrow, we're going on an Edgar Allan Poe tour in Providence. But they just sent an email that it's like 100% chance of rain, so it may be canceled. So if that doesn't happen, I don't know, maybe we'll watch a movie or something and have some food. But yeah, no crazy plans for me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day, surviving the nor'easter to have power in the internet to be able to connect with us. And share your experience in podcasting and lots of other things. So I really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for joining and piping in with lots of great questions today. I appreciate everybody. And I hope you all have a wonderful day and a great Halloween weekend.
Yes, thank you all. And if you have any more questions for me, feel free to, probably the best avenue would be either LinkedIn, Alex Piscatelli, or Twitter at Alex Piscatelli. So it's just my name. So yeah, Twitter is probably the best. I don't know why I said LinkedIn. I was trying to be professional, but either way.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, everybody. Have a great one.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.